The morning started like any other at Kensington Palace. The sun came up slowly behind the clouds, and the gardens outside were still wet from the night's rain. Birds moved through the trees and everything felt quiet, the kind of quiet that holds something heavy inside it. Inside the palace, the staff moved carefully through the corridors, speaking softly as if they all understood that this was not an ordinary day. It was the kind of day that people would remember long after it had passed. Catherine, Princess of Wales, had been facing her health battle with incredible strength. For months, she had kept herself steady in front of the world, smiling for cameras, waving from windows, appearing at just the right moments so that the public knew she was still there, still fighting, still present. But behind closed doors, the weight of everything was felt deeply by those closest to her. The treatment had been long and hard, and it had taken something out of her, not her spirit, which remained as strong as ever, but her physical energy, which came and went like the tide. There were good days, and there were days when getting out of bed felt like climbing a mountain. Through all of it, William had stayed close. He had barely left her side. William, Prince of Wales, was not someone who wore his emotions openly. He had grown up in a family where composure was expected, where feelings were managed quietly, and where the public face always had to remain calm. He had learned early how to hold himself together even when things inside were falling apart. But the people who knew him best, his closest staff, a few old friends, could see the change in him during those months. He looked tired in a way that sleep could not fix. His eyes carried something heavier than exhaustion. He was a man who was deeply in love with his wife, and watching someone you love go through pain is a kind of suffering that has no name. The decision about the farewell had not come easily. It was not planned in the usual royal way, with committees and schedules and approved press releases. It came from something much simpler, a feeling shared between two people, that there was something important that needed to be said and done before the moment passed. Kate had brought it up one evening when the children were asleep and the house was quiet. She had looked at William across the room and told him that she wanted to do something real. Not a public appearance, not a planned event. Something that came from the heart. William had listened. He always listened to her. That was one of the things people did not always see from the outside, how well these two people actually heard each other. Their relationship, built over years that began in university hallways and grew through the most intense public scrutiny imaginable, had developed a deep language of its own. They could communicate whole conversations with a single look. And when Kate spoke that evening about wanting a quiet goodbye, not a final one, but a meaningful one, a moment carved out of the busy and painful noise of everything they had been living through, William understood immediately. The planning took only a few days. That was unusual for anything involving the royal family, where even small decisions could take weeks of coordination. But this was different. This was personal. The staff who were trusted with the details kept everything close, understanding without being told that this was sacred ground. A small team was assembled, just enough people to make things work without turning the moment into something it was not meant to be. The location chosen was a place that held meaning for both of them. It was not a grand palace or a formal royal estate. It was a quieter place, somewhere they had gone in earlier years, before everything had grown so large and complicated. A place where they had once walked together without the weight of the world watching. The idea was simple, to return to something that felt like themselves. Before the titles and the duties and the illness had layered everything so thickly, to stand in a place that remembered them as just two people who had found each other and decided to build a life together. On the morning of the farewell, Kate woke early. She sat by the window for a while before the rest of the household stirred, looking out at the garden. She had always loved gardens, the way things grew quietly, the way nature moved at its own pace without caring about schedules or expectations. There was something comforting in that. She thought about the children, who were staying with trusted family for the day. She thought about what she wanted to say, and whether words would even be enough. And then she decided that they probably would not be, and that was fine. Some things did not need to be said in words. William came to find her not long after. He brought tea, which was the simplest and most honest thing he could have done. And he sat beside her without speaking for a while. They watched the garden together. The quiet between them was not uncomfortable. It never had been. It was the kind of quiet that two people share when they have been through enough together that silence feels like its own kind of conversation. The staff moved around them gently, preparing for the day. There was no rush. William had made it clear that whatever happened that day would happen at whatever pace felt right. No one was going to interrupt that. He had spoken to the necessary people, cleared the schedule, and made sure that the outside world would not intrude. For one day they were going to exist just for each other. By mid-morning, everything was ready. Kate stood up from the window seat and reached out her hand. William took it. They walked together through the corridor, toward the door. And the staff who saw them pass did not say anything. They simply stepped back and let them go. Some of them had been with the family for years, and more than one of them felt something tighten in their chest. As they watched the couple move quietly toward the waiting car. Outside, the sky had cleared. The rain had stopped in the night. The air was fresh and cool in the way that only happens after a storm has washed everything clean. Kate tilted her head back slightly as she stepped into the open air, feeling the coolness of it on her face. William watched her do it. He watched everything she did with the kind of attention that people only give to things they are afraid of losing. Then he opened the car door, and she got in, and he followed, and the door closed, and they were gone. The palace behind them stood tall and quiet. A few birds landed in the garden. Everything looked the same as it always did. But something had shifted, something invisible and important, and the people who had watched them leave all felt it. Even if none of them could explain exactly what it was. The drive took just over an hour. They went through countryside roads that curved between fields, past small towns where ordinary people were going about their ordinary mornings, opening shops, walking dogs, dropping children at school. The world outside the car windows looked peaceful, unhurried, beautifully simple. Kate watched it all with her face turned slightly toward the glass. She did not speak much during the drive, and neither did William. But at some point her hand found his on the seat between them, and he turned his palm upward so she could hold it properly. And they stayed like that for most of the journey. The driver and the single protection officer in the front kept their eyes forward. They had been chosen carefully for exactly this kind of moment. People who understood the difference between doing their job and intruding on something private. The radio was off. The world outside moved at its own pace. Inside the car, time felt slower, more deliberate. It's like it was being handled with extra care. When they arrived, Kate was the first to step out. She stood for a moment at the edge of the path and looked around her. The place had not changed much. There were more trees now, perhaps, or maybe she just remembered it differently, filtered through years that had been so full of everything else. The air here smelled like grass, and something faintly floral. The light came down through the leaves in long pale strips that moved gently when the breeze picked up. She breathed in deeply and then smiled. Not a camera smile. Not the practiced expression she had given to crowds and events and appearances. This was a real smile, small and quiet. The kind that comes from somewhere deep before the person even knows it is happening. William came to stand beside her. He looked at what she was looking at, trying to see it the way she was seeing it. He had always done that. Tried to share her perspective, to stand in the same moment she was standing in, rather than just beside it. It was one of the small and unnoticed things that had made their partnership what it was. He put his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into him slightly. And they stood there together at the beginning of the path without moving for a full minute, just taking it in. Then they walked. The path wound through a stretch of open meadow before dipping into a small woodland section, where the light changed and the air grew cooler. They walked slowly, without any destination beyond the walking itself. Kate talked a little about small things at first. The children, a funny moment George had had the week before. Something Charlotte had said that still made her laugh when she thought about it. William listened and smiled and added his own memories. And gradually, the conversation grew deeper. The way it always did, when they were somewhere quiet and away from everything. At one point, Kate stopped walking and turned to face him. She looked at him directly, the way she sometimes did when she wanted to make sure he was truly listening and not just present. He met her eyes without looking away. She told him what she needed to tell him. It was not a speech, and it was not rehearsed. It came out in the way that true things tend to come out, a little uneven, sometimes circling back on itself, occasionally interrupted by a pause where the feeling was too large for words to contain it properly. She spoke about what their life together had meant to her. About the years before all of this, when they were young and uncertain, and everything felt possible in that terrifying, wonderful way that only early love can feel. About the life they had built, the children they had raised, the thousands of ordinary days that had made up something extraordinary. About how proud she was of him. About how much she trusted him. William stood very still while she spoke. He had always had a way of going quiet and inward when something was hitting him hard, a way of holding himself carefully so that the emotion did not spill out before he was ready. His jaw tightened slightly at certain moments. His eyes grew brighter in a way that had nothing to do with light. When she finished, he did not say anything right away. He pulled her toward him and held her, and she rested her head against his chest. Neither of them moved for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. He did not try to match the poetry of what she had said or to respond in a way that felt constructed. He just spoke honestly. The way he had learned to speak with her over years of learning that she did not need perfection, she needed truth. He told her that she had made him better, that everything good he had managed to become as a man and as a father had her fingerprints on it, that there were not enough words in any language for what she meant to him, but that he hoped she already knew it because he had tried every single day. To show her, Kate laughed softly at something he said near the end, a small, familiar joke that only made sense between them, the kind of private language that couples build without meaning to. The laugh broke some of the weight in the air, and they both felt it, that slight easing, that breath released. They pulled back from each other, just enough to see each other's faces. And what passed between them in that look was something that no camera would ever capture and no reporter would ever describe correctly. Because it was entirely their own, they continued walking after that. The path curved around to a small open area where a wooden bench sat facing a view across open fields. They sat down together, not speaking now, just watching the landscape spread out in front of them. A few birds moved across the sky in the distance. The breeze came and went. The world felt very wide and very quiet all at once. Kate rested her head on William's shoulder. He rested his cheek against her hair. They sat like that for a long time, two people at the center of an enormous public life, finding in this one small hour something that belonged entirely to themselves. The fields in front of them did not care who they were. The light did not adjust itself for them. Everything simply continued as it always did, and inside that ordinary continuation, something deeply private and irreplaceable was taking place. Neither of them said anything for a long time. They did not need to. Everything important had already been said. What was left was simply this: being present, being together, allowing the moment to be exactly what it was without trying to make it into anything else. The kind of peace that does not come easily and cannot be manufactured. That can only arrive when two people have been through enough together to understand what truly matters and what does not. The protection officer stood, a respectful distance away, eyes scanning the landscape out of habit, but giving them every inch of privacy that could be given. The driver waited by the car on the road below. Time moved, as it always does, at exactly its own pace. And on that bench, in that quiet field, William and Kate stayed as long as they needed to. When they finally stood up from the bench, the sun had shifted. The light across the fields had changed from the pale coolness of morning into something warmer and more golden. The kind of light that makes ordinary landscapes look like paintings. Kate noticed it first. She always noticed things like that. The way the world adjusted itself in small, beautiful ways while you were busy with other things. She pointed it out to William without making a big deal of it. It's just a quiet observation, a small gift of attention shared between two people. He looked where she pointed, and he saw it too, and he nodded slowly in the way he did when something was reaching him beneath the surface. They walked back along the path, out. At the same unhurried pace. There was something different about them now, not dramatically different. Not the kind of difference that would be obvious to a stranger, but something that the people who knew them well would have recognized immediately. A looseness, a settling, as though something that had been held tightly for a very long time had been gently released. and the space left behind was not empty, but filled with something lighter. Kate picked up a small stone from the edge of the path as they walked. She turned it over in her fingers for a moment, feeling the smoothness of it, then slipped it into her coat pocket without explanation. William glanced at her, but did not ask. He had learned long ago that not everything required a question. Some things simply were, and the understanding of them arrived in its own time, or not at all. The stone was hers. That was enough. When they reached the car, the driver stepped forward to open the door, but Kate paused before getting in. She turned and looked back at the path they had come from, at the meadow, the trees, the bench that was just barely visible in the distance. She looked at it for several seconds with an expression that was impossible to read. Entirely, but held within it something like gratitude. Then she turned back, smiled at the driver, thanked him quietly, and got into the car. William followed. The door closed. The world resumed its ordinary motion around them. On the drive back, the energy between them was different from the journey out. The weight of unspoken things was gone now, replaced by something easier, the relaxed closeness that follows honest conversation. The way do people feel when they have said what they needed to say, and survive the saying of it? Kate fell asleep about 20 minutes into the journey. Her head tilted toward the window, her breathing slowed. And she was gone. Not the fitful, troubled sleep that illness and stress can bring, but something deeper and calmer. William watched her sleep for a moment, then looked out his own window at the moving countryside. He thought about everything she had said. He replayed it in his mind, not to analyze it, but simply to hold it, to carry it properly. The way something precious needs to be held with both hands. He thought about the years behind them and the road ahead, which was uncertain in the way that all roads are uncertain, but felt especially so right now. He thought about his children, their faces in the morning, their laughter in the kitchen, the way they still needed him for everything, the way that need was both the most demanding and most grounding thing in his life. He thought about his mother, too, though he often tried not to. But days like this made it hard to avoid. He had been young when he lost her, and the loss had left spaces in him that had never fully closed. What he had understood from that experience, what had worked its way into him slowly over decades, was that time was not something that could be assumed. That the people you loved needed to be loved now, actively and visibly. Not at some later point when everything was more settled. He had tried to live that way with Kate. He hoped she knew it. He believed after today that she did. She woke as they entered the familiar outskirts of the city, the landscape shifting from open countryside to denser streets and buildings. She blinked slowly, disoriented for just a moment, and then looked at William. He was already looking at her. She smiled, that real smile again, the small and quiet one, and he returned it. And that was its own kind of conversation. Back at the palace, things had been kept deliberately calm. The household staff had prepared a simple lunch. Nothing elaborate, nothing that required performance or effort. Just good food in a comfortable setting. The kind of meal that feels like being taken care of without making a production of it. Kate sat down at the table and ate with genuine appetite, which was noticed by those around her with quiet relief. Appetite was always a small measure of things, a small sign that the body was finding its way. They spent the rest of the afternoon inside, mostly quietly. William read for a while. Kate wrote she had always written when she needed to process something. Private journal entries that she had kept for years, pages that no one else would ever read. The scratch of her pen moving across paper was a familiar and comforting sound in the room. William looked up at it occasionally and felt something ease in his chest each time he heard it. She was here. She was present. She was putting words to her own experience, which meant she was still inside it, still shaping it, still herself. By early evening, the children came home. The house changed completely the moment they arrived. The level of noise tripled. Questions were asked from multiple directions at once. Shoes were left in the wrong places. And someone needed something urgently that turned out not to be urgent at all. Kate laughed at the chaos of it, genuinely, fully. She pulled each of them close in turn, George, with his growing teenage self-consciousness softening for a moment when he let her hug him properly. Charlotte still quick and bright and full of commentary about her day. Louis wrapping himself around her with the uncomplicated love of a young child who's not yet learned to hold anything back, William stood in the doorway of the sitting room and watched. He did not join the scene immediately. He let it unfold in front of him for a moment. Kate, in the middle of their children, the noise and warmth of it all, the extraordinary, ordinary life of it. And he let himself feel it entirely. The gratitude and the fear and the love, all together. The way they always arrived together now, inseparable from each other. Then he walked in and joined his family. Charlotte grabbed his hand and began telling him something very important about something that had happened at school. And he gave her his full attention, and the day moved forward, as days always do, carrying everything inside it without apology or pause. Outside, the evening settled over the city. Lights came on in windows. Traffic moved. People came home from work, made dinner, put their children to bed. Across the country, in houses and flats and in spaces that had nothing to do with palaces or royalty, life continued in all its ordinary, complicated, irreplaceable detail. And inside the palace walls, something had been quietly tended to that day. Something private and real. And it would continue to matter long after the day itself had passed. 3 days passed before the world found out that anything had happened at all. It came out not through an official announcement or a press release or a carefully timed photograph, but through a single photograph published by a small regional outlet. Someone who had been walking in the countryside that day and had spotted the couple from a distance, had recognized them despite the ordinary clothes and the absence of any obvious security presence, and had taken a photograph on a phone from far enough away that the image was blurry at the edges. In the photo, 2 figures sat side by side on a bench in an open field. The woman's head was on the man's shoulder. The man's face was turned slightly away from the camera. The landscape behind them was wide and golden and unremarkable. The photograph spread within hours. It was not a dramatic image. There were no tears visible, no grand gestures, nothing that could be called spectacular by any ordinary standard of news. And yet something about it stopped people. It appeared on phones and screens and front pages and timelines across the country and then across the world. And people paused when they saw it in a way that they did not pause for most things. They looked at it longer than they usually looked at photographs. Some of them looked at it more than once. It was hard to explain exactly why. Journalists tried, and most of them got part of it right. They wrote about Kate's health journey and what it had meant to the public. They wrote about William's visible devotion during the difficult months. They wrote about the symbolism of 2 public figures choosing a private moment. About the contrast between the enormous weight of royal duty and this single image of 2 people simply being together in a field. All of that was accurate. None of it was the whole thing. The whole thing was something simpler. People recognized something in that photograph. Not the royalty, not the fame, not the history, something underneath all of that. Something that had nothing to do with titles or palaces or public significance. They recognized the shape of 2 people who had been through something hard together, and had come out the other side still holding on. They recognized the particular kind of closeness that cannot be performed or manufactured. The closeness that only comes from having stood beside someone in the difficult places and chosen to stay. People who had lost someone they loved looked at the photographed and felt it in their chests. People who were sitting with someone they loved through illness recognized the posture, the lean, the particular quality of stillness that belongs to those kinds of moments. People who had their own difficult seasons, who were tired or frightened or carrying more than they let anyone see, looked at the image and felt something loosen slightly. Because here were 2 people who were also carrying something heavy and who were carrying it together. And there was a kind of permission in that. The palace did not comment immediately. This was unusual, since any image involving the Prince and Princess of Wales typically prompted a rapid response from communications staff. But this time, several hours passed in silence. People noticed the silence and interpreted it in various ways, some of them more dramatic than the reality. The reality was simpler. William had seen the photograph, and his initial response had been an instinctive protectiveness, a desire to pull the moment back from public view and keep it where it belonged, which was private. But Kate had seen it too, and she had said something that changed his thinking. She had said that she did not mind. She had sat with the image on a screen for a long time, and then she had said, quietly and without drama, that she did not mind people seeing it. That if it meant something to someone, then that was all right. That was the thing about Kate. Her generosity was not a performance. It extended even into the moments that were most personally hers. She had spent years in public life, understanding that the role she occupied carried a responsibility, that the feelings of the people who looked to her were real and deserved to be taken seriously. And even in this most private of moments, she could hold that understanding alongside her own needs without losing either. A brief statement was released that evening. It confirmed that the couple had spent a private day together in the countryside. It did not describe what had happened or what had been said. It did not need to. The photograph already told people everything they needed to know. And the things it did not tell them were exactly the right things to keep quiet. The response from the public was extraordinary. Messages arrived in volumes that the palace communications team described as among the highest they had ever processed. They came from everywhere, from people who had never given much thought to the royal family, from people who had been skeptical or critical, from people who simply wrote that they had looked at the photograph and cried, and had not entirely understood why, but had needed to tell someone. From elderly people who described their own long marriages, their own difficult seasons, the things they wished they had said when they had the chance, and the things they were glad they had said when they did. From young couples who had shown the photograph to each other without comment, understanding something through the image that they might not have found the words for on their own. There was a woman in the north of England who had been sitting with her husband through his cancer treatment for most of the past year. She had not slept properly in months. She had held herself together with the particular disciplined determination of a person who knows that they are the one who has to keep standing while the person they love cannot. She saw the photograph on her phone while sitting in a hospital waiting room, and she looked at it for a long time. And then she wrote to the palace, which she had never done before in her life, would never have imagined doing before this, and she said simply that seeing it had made her feel less alone. She was not the only one who wrote something like that. She was one of thousands. William read some of the messages himself. He was not always given direct access to public correspondence. There were teams who managed it, who filtered and categorized and summarized, but this time he had asked to see some of them directly. And he sat with a selection of them in the evening and read carefully. Some of them were difficult to get through. Some of them said things that landed hard and stayed there. When he was done, he sat quietly for a while with the papers in his hands. And then he set them down carefully as though they were something that needed to be treated with respect. Which they were, Kate, when told about the scope of the response. Was moved but not entirely surprised. She had always had a particular kind of faith in people, a belief that underneath the noise and the division and the difficulty of public life, there was a shared human current that ran through everything. A current of feeling and recognition that connected people to each other in ways that were real, even when they were invisible. The photograph had touched that current. She had somehow known it would, not consciously, not as a plan, but in that deep intuitive way that she carried so many of her understandings. About the world, she asked for pen and paper that evening. She sat at her desk by the window and she wrote, not a public statement. It's not something for release, but her own private words for her own private record. What she wrote stayed private, but the act of writing it was its own kind of response. Her way of holding the day and everything it had opened, keeping it in a form she could return to outside. The night moved across the city in its unhurried way. The photograph continued to travel across the world, landing on screens in languages neither William nor Kate spoke, in places they had never visited, in moments they would never know about. And in each of those moments, something passed between the image and the person looking at it. Something quiet and genuine and impossibly human, and it changed the quality of that moment. However briefly, in a way that mattered. Weeks passed. The photograph faded from the front pages. Displaced by the constant flow of news that the world produces without pause or mercy, the coverage moved on to other things, other people, other moments. That is the nature of public attention. It moves like water, finding the next channel, always in motion. But the photograph itself did not disappear. It stayed. It was pinned to walls and saved in phone libraries and printed out and placed in frames. It was sent between people who loved each other with messages that said very little because the image said enough. It had entered the particular category of things that people keep, not because they are famous or historically significant, but because they are true. For William and Kate, life continued in the way that it always had to continue, with duty and routine and the specific demands of their position that did not pause for personal difficulty. There were engagements, appearances, meetings, and the constant machinery of royal life that required attention regardless of what was happening behind private doors. William managed it. He always had. He had been trained since childhood in the discipline of showing up, being present for the public role, even when the private self was exhausted or afraid. But people who had watched him closely over the years said that something had changed after that day in the countryside. Something subtle but real. He seemed more settled, less defended, as though whatever had been released in that quiet field had created a space in him that was now occupied by T.E. Its treatment continued. There were better weeks and harder weeks, as there always were. She approached all of it with the same quiet determination that had defined her handling of the entire journey, not with dramatic declarations of strength or carefully constructed public optimism, but with a genuine lived-in resilience that came from a very real place. She did not pretend things were fine when they were not. She did not perform courage. She simply kept going, which is the truest form of it. The children were the center of everything. George, Charlotte, and Louis moved through their days with the particular unconscious resilience of children who are loved and secure, who know they are anchored even when the waters around them are complicated. William and Kate were fiercely committed to that anchoring, to making sure that whatever else was uncertain, the children would feel the bedrock of their parents' love and presence. Family dinners were protected. Bedtime routines were kept. School runs happened. Football was played in the garden with the kind of loud, chaotic joy that makes everything else temporarily irrelevant. The ordinary life was held and tended as though it were the most important thing in the world. Because it was. There was an evening in late autumn when William found himself sitting on the edge of Louis's bed after the youngest had fallen asleep. He had sat down just to check on him and had somehow stayed, watching the boy breathe in the soft light, listening to the small sounds of the house around him. He thought about time, not with dread or grief, but with a kind of sharp clarity. He thought about how fast children grew, how quickly each version of them passed and became the next version, and how the secret of it was to be present enough to actually see what was in front of you before it shifted into something else. He sat there for a long time, longer than he had planned, just watching his son sleep. Later that night, he told Kate about it. They were talking quietly in the way they often did in the late evening. In that hour, when the house was finally still, and they could speak without any agenda, she listened, and she smiled, that real smile, the small one, and she said that she thought that was exactly right. That the secret of all of it was presence, being truly there for the moments that were right in front of you, without letting what was frightening or uncertain crowd them out. She had thought about that a great deal over the past difficult year, she said. It had become something like a philosophy, though she would not have called it that, just a way of deciding where to put her attention. It was that philosophy, rooted in their experience of that day in the countryside and everything it had opened between them, that began to shape the way both of them moved through the months that followed. William applied it to his public work, throwing himself into causes and conversations with a directness and authenticity that people noticed and responded to. Kate, as her health allowed, returned to the work that was most meaningful to her, approaching it not with relief at returning to normalcy, but with a new quality of intention, as though she understood more clearly than before what all of it was for. The farewell, which had not been a final goodbye, but a necessary one, a clearing of space, a speaking of truth. A deliberate choosing of each other in the middle of uncertainty had done exactly what Kate had hoped it would do. It had made room. It had taken everything that had been accumulating in the silent spaces between obligation and fear and illness and duty, and given it a shape, a place to land, a form. and from that release had grown something that sustained them both in the weeks and months that came after. Something they drew on without always naming it, the way people draw on the deepest things. The photograph remained on screens and walls, and in personal libraries across the world. People continued to find it months later, a year later, and continued to feel something when they did. A woman in Scotland discovered it while clearing out old bookmarks and sat with her coffee going cold as she looked at it and thought. Her own difficult year, the ways her husband had stayed beside her. A young man in Australia showed it to his girlfriend and told her, clumsily and sincerely, that he hoped they would always be able to sit like that together. A retired nurse in Wales kept a printed copy of it folded in her bedside drawer and could not have explained entirely why, except that it reminded her of something she needed to be reminded of regularly, that love, when it is real, holds its shape even under the heaviest kinds of pressure. The people in the photograph did not know about these moments. They could not. They went about their lives as everyone goes about their lives in the particular privacy of their own experience, knowing only what they could see and feel from where they were standing. But the image they had unknowingly left behind kept doing its quiet work in the world, landing in the right moments for the right people, offering something that could not be named precisely, but was understood immediately by everyone who needed it. Because what the photograph captured, without planning, without performance, without any intention other than two people being genuinely present with each other in a field, on a quiet morning, was something that people recognize wherever they find it. It is the thing that holds underneath all the noise and difficulty and complexity of being alive. The simple, stubborn, extraordinary fact of love that does not flinch. Love that sits down in the hard place and stays. Love that does not need an audience or a perfect setting or ideal circumstances. Love that is most itself precisely in the moments when everything else is most uncertain. That was what William and Kate had given, without meaning to give anything at all. And the world, which is often better at feeling things than it is given credit for, knew exactly what it had received.